I never believed the world could end quietly. But that's exactly how it started. With nothing but the sound of the wind in the wheat fields as the sun set and the first lights appeared in the clouds. Pale green glimmers like distant lightning. But there was no thunder, no rain, just a sky that pulsed as if it were breathing. At first, I thought they were some kind of military exercise, maybe flares or drones. But when the news station started running silent banners saying to stay indoors, when the power cut out in the middle of the emergency broadcast, I realized this wasn't something we were prepared for. And by the time the first night passed, the world as I knew it was already gone. On that first night, the sky opened with a low hum that made my teeth ache. And when I stepped out onto the porch, against my better judgment, I saw shapes falling from the clouds like rain, only they didn't hit the ground. They hovered, silver discs the size of cars, each one spinning slowly until a beam of light lanced down and carved a perfect circle into the ground. I ran back inside, grabbed my backpack, my radio, and every bottle of water I had, and barricaded myself in the cellar as the night filled with screams, metallic groans, and the unmistakable smell of burning wood and plastic. The sound of my small town being erased above my head. By morning, there was no power, no cell service, no distant hum of cars on the highway, only silence. And when I peeked outside, the world was changed. Streets, blackened houses, split, open, and people nowhere to be seen, as if they had been scooped up like toys by a careless child. I made the decision then to leave, because staying in the cellar felt like waiting to be buried alive. And I packed what I could carry, stepping carefully through the remains of my neighborhood until I reached the road, where I saw the first of them. Not the ships, but the things that walked beneath them. They were tall, insect-thin, their limbs bending wrong, and their heads smooth and featureless, except for the single dark eye that glowed like an ember. And when one turned toward me, I froze, my heart hammering, before it turned away again and continued scanning the road with a thin beam of red light. I ducked into the trees and followed the highway from the cover of the forest, watching as more of the machines swept the area, some dragging long tendrils across the ground that sparked and sizzled, like they were tasting the earth, and I moved only when the wind drowned out the hum of their steps. By the second night, I found other survivors, a family of 4 hiding in the ruins of a gas station, their youngest daughter clutching a stuffed rabbit so tightly I could see her knuckles turning white. And they let me stay with them because none of us wanted to face the dark alone. We whispered to each other that night, trading stories, and the father told me he had seen whole neighborhoods lifted into the sky by beams of light, screaming people dangling in midair, vanish before vanishing into the clouds, and we agreed we would try to make it to the old storm shelter near the industrial park. The third day was worse than the others, because by then the ships were lower the sky, darker, and the things that walked. The ground began to leave behind smaller shapes that moved on their own spindly drones, no bigger than dogs that crawled through. Wreckage searching for anything that moved, clicking and chirping like cicadas. We stayed hidden as long as we could, but by nightfall the drones were too close, their search pattern sweeping closer with each pass. So we made a run for it, sprinting through alleys, over fences, until we saw the shelter ahead, a low concrete dome barely sticking out of the ground, and we thought we might actually make it. Then the beam came. It struck the road ahead of us, turning asphalt to molten glass, and in that searing light, I saw them descending. Not just ships, but the creatures themselves, riding beams of light like elevators, their long limbs, unfolding as they touched down and began to move toward us in perfect unison. We dove for the shelter, forcing the door open, as the heat from the beam burned my neck and we slammed it shut behind us. Just as the ground above shook from a direct hit, dust raining from the ceiling, as the whole shelter groaned. Inside it was pitch black until we lit a lantern, and that S when we saw we weren't the first to arrive. There were dozens of people already there, silent, pale, their faces gaunt with hunger and fear, and the air was thick with the smell of sweat and unwashed bodies. We stayed there through the entire second night, listening as the sounds above shifted, from beams and explosions to something worse. The scraping of claws against concrete, the sound of something testing the door, and I held my breath until it stopped. When dawn came, the survivors decided to split up, some saying they couldn't stay underground any longer, that they would take their chances heading toward the mountains. But I stayed, because I knew this was only the halfway point, that the invasion wasn't over. The third day brought silence, an eerie calm that felt like the world holding its breath, and some dared to step outside, thinking maybe it was over. But I stayed below with the family, clutching the radio and waiting for a signal that never came. That night, the final night, the sky was so bright it turned night into day, the beams crisscrossing like searchlights, and then the ground itself began to hum a vibration, so deep it felt like it was shaking the air out of my lungs. And that S, when we realized this was indeed just about wiping out people. They were remaking the earth. We could hear the ground tearing outside, the shelter door glowing faintly as if under intense heat. And I thought we were done for. But then the sound stopped all at once, replaced by a single deafening roar as the ships began to ascend, rising back into the clouds until the night was dark again. When we emerged at dawn, the world was scarred but quiet, the sky empty for the first time in 3 days, and in the distance we could see smoke rising from places where whole cities used to be. But there were no ships, no machines, only silence and the faint smell of ash. I don't know why they left, whether we had been spared or simply abandoned like a finished project. But as I stood there in the grey dawn with the family beside me, I knew we had survived something that had changed us forever, and we would have to rebuild from whatever was left. I buried the dead we found near the road, marked the shelter as safe, and set out to find more survivors. Because the only way to make sense of what had happened was to make sure humanity was entire, finished. Not yet, not after what we'd endured. By the time the sun was high, I could hear other voices calling from the distance, faint but human. And for the first time in 72 hours, I felt hope. Not because the danger was gone, but because we were still here, still fighting and still alive.